All right, well, we know that you don't want to bet every game, but sometimes you do have to pick a side and just kind of go with it. That's what the toss-up bets are. These are the toss-up bets for Week 11, the games you probably shouldn't bet. But maybe this info will help you make a decision. Frank Stampfl of Sports Grid joins us now to show us the pros side. And we start things off with the Panthers home favorites, giving 4.5 to the Falcons. Carolina challenged Green Bay. Falcons still trying to figure out their defensive issues. How do you see this?
Yeah, I think this is a big letdown spot for the Atlanta Falcons, coming off that big victory against the New Orleans Saints here. And you're right, Carolina has been, competitive in pretty much every game so far this year with Kyle Allen as their quarterback. They went into Green Bay last week, and they were driving down the field and trying to tie that game late in Lambeau with it snowing. So they have arguably the MVP of the season right now in Christian McCaffrey on that team. And, if I had to choose a side here, I would lean with the Carolina Panthers, the fact that they're home and the fact that I think that they will be able to expose this Falcons secondary. They have two really strong wide receivers in DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel, but ultimately don't really like this game because the Atlanta Falcons did show me something last week.
Well, and that's the thing is, their defense just has not been able to figure things out. And if you can't stop anybody, you need Matt Ryan to be the NFL leader in passes thrown to just kind of make it a game. No team this week has a bigger spread, though, than the Broncos. 10.5-point road dogs in Minnesota. The Vikings have won all of their home games by double digits. How's that for a little nugget for you?
It's a great nugget, Steve.
But sometimes nuggets aren't facts. Well, I mean, that is a fact.
That is a fact.
It doesn't portend what the future is going to hold.
And it has been a good spot for Mike Zimmer throughout his coaching career with the Minnesota Vikings. They've, always performed well at home. But the Denver Broncos have been a bet-on team so far this season. That defense is still really good under Vic Fangio. They are top 12 in both pass and run defense, DVOA. But on the other side, you're going up against one of the offensive juggernauts in the league. If you remember earlier on in the season, Adam Thielen calls out Kirk Cousins after that loss in Chicago. And ever since then, I mean, Kirk Cousins has been lighting it up, and he's been playing extremely well. And they also have Dalvin Cook, but it's just a lot of points right now. The way that Denver Broncos defense is playing, this is an iffy one for me because you don't really want to trust Brandon Allen on the road. That's why it's part of this toss-up segment here. If I had to choose one, I would lean with the Broncos based on the way that their defense is played. But, as you mentioned, the Vikings are tough at home.
Yeah. 10.5 points is a big number, though. The fact that they're getting that many points. The Colts coming off a loss to the Dolphins, but they're 3-point home favorites to the Jaguars. Help me out on this one, then. You lose to the Dolphins. How are you a favorite the following week?
I think it's the unknown here, right?
Okay.
Nick Foles is returning for the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's got to shake off some rust. I think, the odds makers are trying to figure out what to do with Nick Foles here. And Jacoby Brissett looks like he is going to return here for the Indianapolis Colts. He's been practicing in full. And, we oftentimes throughout the season, we've talked about how great of a coach that Frank Reich is. Well, it didn't look that way last week, losing at home against the Miami Dolphins. Is that on him or is that on Brian Hoyer?
I was going to say, there's a big drop-off between Brissett and Hoyer.
Absolutely. We can go from Andrew Luck and to Jacoby Brissett.
But you take one step further down?
But you go one step further, and I'm not sure that you can make it work with Brian Hoyer. Ultimately, they couldn't last week against the Dolphins. Again, this is a tougher game to call here because you don't know what you're going to get from Nick Foles. But Leonard Fournette has played extremely well. The way to attack the Colts defense is on the ground, so they should be able to keep this game close. But again, looks like a bounce-back spot for the Colts and Jacoby Brissett. So if I had to choose one, I would go with the Colts, but toss-up.
That's why we're in the toss-up segments right now. We're not quite sure which way to go. How about the Rams? 6.5-point home favorites to the Bears. This Rams team does not look like the same team this year, and I think the public is finally getting sick of putting money on the Rams. Are you seeing that right now?
We're all sick of putting money on the Rams. We're actually sick of this game. Don't touch this game. If you have to touch this game, I would lean with the under, right? So whenever you see a total this low, Steve, but you see a spread 6.5, 7 in that point range, it's very questionable, right? It brings up some concerns here.
Because the whole point is when you're trying to pick a line, you are telling yourself a story of how that game is going to play out. And a low-scoring game with a high spread doesn't happen that often.
Yeah, so it doesn't really add up here. And that's why if I had to choose something here, I would lean with the under. If you want to choose a side, I would go with the Bears just because, again, their secondary has played well. Jared Goff has not looked right so far this season. The Bears' run defense has been a little bit more susceptible since Akeem Hicks has gone down. But I can't really trust either offense, the way that they're playing. You know, between Jared Goff, the struggles that he's shown, Cooper Kupp held without a catch last week.
Unbelievable.
It's just the inconsistencies that we've seen in both of these offense. If you had to choose something, I lean with the under.
All right, the Chiefs, 4-point favorites over the Chargers in Mexico. The Chargers are really starting to disappoint us. Will a trip to Mexico maybe change their fortunes a little bit?
I don't think that it's going to change much here, Steve.
Because it's the Chiefs.
Again, the Chargers defense, they can't stop the run. They can't stop the pass. We all saw on Thursday Night Football last week in prime time, Josh Jacobs score the winning touchdown for the Oakland Raiders against this Chargers team. And Phillip Rivers, I mean, on a weekly basis, you don't know which guy is going to show up. He has only thrown for multiple touchdowns 2 different occasions this season. And, you know, he threw the pick 6 last week against the Oakland Raiders. So the inconsistencies with Phillip Rivers, the fact that the Chiefs' pass defense has actually played really, really well this year. They've struggled on the ground. That's what gives me pause here because Melvin Gordon is starting to come along. You know, he's starting to get his legs underneath him. He had the holdout, but now he's starting to play well against this Chiefs run defense. You know, that's why it kind of, creates that, that questionable nature in this game. If I had to choose a side, I would go with the Kansas City Chiefs. The way that offense is playing right now, Patrick Mahomes over 400 yards and 3 touchdowns in his first game back, but don't touch this game.
I always find it funny. That's why I love the toss-up segments. I always find it funny because it's almost like you're almost apologizing for choosing one of these teams.
I'm telling you both sides of the story here.
Right. No, that's exactly what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to give them options, but I apologize. I've got to choose one team. That's the toss-up plays for Week 11. Make sure you check out our other segments on top plays and leans. For Frank Stampfl of Sports Grid, I'm Steve Overmyer. This is Fanalysis.